Do you struggle with adding depth and dimension to your paintings? Do they sometimes look flat and just two-dimensional? You want to get that more realistic depth that draws you into your painting. Stay tuned because we're going to talk about that today. I am Angela Clark, the artist behind Clark Fine Art. And welcome back. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of A Winter's Day in the Park. Today, we're going to focus on putting in our snow and our brook, placing our bridge, the bridge location, and then we're going to add our background trees and our middle ground trees. So, without further ado, let's get to it. To begin part 2, we're going to want to mix up the color of our snow. And we're going to want to take our titanium white and blend a color that's just a little bit darker because this is going to be our mid-range. So if we take what was left from when we had mixed up our gray for our background in part 1, when we blend this out, we're going to get a nice pale gray color. And this can be the mid-tone for our snow. So we're going to take this and we're going to start to define where our stream is going to go. So we want to lay in the direction of our stream. It's going to just kind of wind its way down through our painting. And you're just going to lay this out. And then we're going to come back and we're going to fill in all of our snow. So laying that in, you're going to want to make sure as you go through and you hit that horizon line, that horizon doesn't need to be perfectly straight, right? It's snow, snow falls, it's fluffy, it's bumpy. So it doesn't matter. You don't need to have a nice, perfect straight line on your horizon. So you're going to be able to cover up where you can see we have that slightly darker line from when we laid in the horizon line in part 1. So we're just going to come through, lay over that, and keep adding our snow through. So now you've run out of, I ran out of my mid-tone. So I can continue mixing this and leaving that edge that where I had my snow color before and continuing to mix. It'll allow me to just keep adding the little bits of the gray, the little bits of the titanium white until I get a color that matches perfectly to what I had before. And I can see that because I left some of it untouched on my palette. So now we just come back through and finish laying in our snow. And this is just going to be our mid-tone. We're going to come back through later and we're going to add highlights and shadows and really give this snow some texture. So now we're going to want to mix up the colors for our brook. And it's going to be similar to that background color we had. So we're going to go back into the color we did in our background sky. And we're just going to lay this horizontally. This is going to represent the water. So it's going to go left to right, strokes always left to right. As you come around that bend, kind of follow the bend, follow the curve, the way that the water would flow if the brook was running. We're going to have this be a winter scene, so our brook is going to be frozen over. So we're going to want to create like the illusion that it's ice. And the way we're going to do that is just continuously mixing up some varieties of gray tones. And we're just going to keep adding those through, always going through that horizontal direction and just filling in the little white spaces here and there. As we keep adding these and filling in the little spaces, you're going to see that we're going to get a very nice blend and it's going to start to look like ice. As we mix up these colors, if you mix more and the color comes out slightly different, that's okay. Just go back up through and you'll see me do it a couple times. Just go back up through and bring that color here and there throughout the entire little brook and it will just blend in and it will look perfectly fine. So here we're going to add a little bit more darker tones. And again, just bringing them down through here and there, all the way through your brook. And just keep going back and forth between your darker tones and your lighter tones and blend this through until all of that canvas or paper, whichever you're using, is covered. And then you're just going to keep adding layers until you get it where you want it. And this looks pretty dark. So I'm going to come through and mix up a little bit of a lighter color, and I'm going to add a bit of water to that because I want to thin this down. And I want to get some of the reflection, right? There's snow all around me. So I want some brighter colors in here too. And I'm going to lay this down. Then I'm going to come back through with my blending brush. And this is my makeup blending brush. There will be a link in the description below, or it'll be in the kit. I love this brush. It does not shed any hair or bristles on your painting. So I spend zero time picking things off my painting. I absolutely love this brush. So just keep blending that down through. You'll see that just adds a few highlights in there and is really helping us get the look of ice, frozen water. So now I'm switching over to my number 2 liner brush, and we're going to start to lay in the banks of our stream. So we want to pay attention to how it curves, because you're going to have a shadow where it comes around, and then that shadow is going to kind of disappear, right? So we can see this side, we're going to put in that bank, but we wouldn't see the shadow on the right until it starts to curve back around towards us. And then we can throw that shadow in on the opposite side. So by rolling my brush like this, really helps me get that nice fine point. And if your paint is not flowing very well, add a little bit of water, mix it up, spin your brush, roll your brush out of the paint. It'll give you that nice fine tip on your paintbrush. And then you can come that through. And you're going to want to start with a nice thinner line, and it gets thicker as you go, and then back thinner as you let off, as you come around the curve. And that nice and thin gets thicker, and then let off and let it get thin on the end. So you see how we're just alternating back and forth. Pick up the shadow where we would see the shadow. Then as the bank protrudes, we can't see that part. No shadow, it would pick up on the opposite side. And we're just going to do that as we come through. And that's just going to give us a little bit more dimension in our painting. So now we're not going to have to worry too much about, right about where my hand is here, we're not going to have to worry too much about this area, because we're going to end up putting our bridge in, and it's going to go right about here. So our bridge is going to cover these parts. So now I'm going to switch to my filbert, and I'm going to touch up the edges of the banks, because where the gray kind of comes over into our snow, we're just going to touch that up, clean up that edge. And you'll start to see the banks of our brook, stream, river, whatever you want to call yours. We're going to start to see those really begin to be defined. And you're going to feel that height, right? You have that bank. It's up above the height of your water. And as you fill this in and you have your shadows there as it comes around, you really start to get that height up off of the ice. So as you put these in, you can kind of see this little bit of the line showing where my color might not be exactly what my snow was. Don't worry about that. As you put your color down, put it down, pull it out into the rest of your snow. And as you see that nice harsh line I have there, I'm just going to want to take that and pull it out into the snow. That's going to blend that edge out. And we're going to be coming back through with some highlights and some shadows. So all of this will blend through in the end and you won't see that sharp edge where you just added to the banks. So just blending that color through, that's going to start to add to the texture of the snow and it's going to blend everything through. So now where the black lines are on our banks, just kind of coming through and touching up those edges so I have a nice clean line. But I want to make sure as I do this that I'm pulling into, by holding my brush on its side like that, I can get really detail on that edge. And I want to make sure that I pull into my brook. And if the filbert is not giving you the control that you need, here I've switched back to my number 2 hog liner, and that just kind of allows me to pull everything back in towards the brook, keep my edge very detailed, and I have a lot more control. So I'm just filling in any of the white spots that might still be left over from the snow that was underneath and cleaning up all of those edges right along the black. You see on the left there, I still have some white, and I'll just come back through and bring that gray back in, and it'll cover those white edges. Always pulling in towards, you can drag your brush down along the black line, that shadow, but then you're going to want to pull in the same direction that the rest of your water is going. You don't want to leave any of those brush strokes going the wrong direction because they will just stand out. And again, if the color is slightly different, if you've had to mix more color and it's slightly different, just pull it through here and there on the brook and it will blend right in. So you see, I go the opposite direction I need my water to go, but then I pull it into the brook. There we go. And just blending that color, because again, it was slightly different. So just blending that color throughout the brook. So this is where I stepped back and realized that the background just didn't have enough of the warmth that I wanted. So where we added that warmth in part 1, this is where that happened. So we are going to jump over to that. And now I'm just going to bring a little bit of that warm tone, that warmer gray, in through the brook so that it just looks natural from my sky to my water. So once we have that all set, next we're going to grab our liner brush and we're going to start working on laying in the placement of our bridge. So taking our Mars Black, and we're going to want to thin this down so that it can flow. We're going to really want a good flow in our paint. And of course, I'm using heavy body paint, so you're going to see me add a bit of water to mine. So now we want to place our bridge, and we have to get our bridge from the left side of our painting, of course, to the right side of our painting. But our bridge is also going deeper into our painting. As it goes to the right, it's going deeper in. So you're going to see that at an angle. And as I place my bridge, I'm just sketching where I want it to start and stop. And now the position of these posts, if you don't do the posts, just do the arch. Because the posts, we're going to change these positions in part 3. So if you leave these posts out, you're going to save yourselves a lot of time. If you've already put them in, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Again, we're going to adjust that and I go over how to do that. I just wanted to let you know. These are going to change slightly. So right now I'm just trying to get the position of the bridge and setting these arches, it's not looking quite right to me at this moment. And I believe I need to change this front arch. It's just not, I think the part that's on the left side is not far enough forward. So we're going to end up bringing that forward so that we can kind of widen that bridge and give it more depth. I just keep working on this angle, and I know it's really bothering me. It's not quite right. So bringing the back arch up a little higher. And then we're going to have people on this bridge. We just need the room, and it's still not quite there yet. We will bring this front arch back slightly on the left side. It's going to stay where it is on the right side, but we're going to just open that, widen that up so that we have more of the illusion of depth into our painting. Everything on the right side will be closer together and smaller in size, and everything on the left side is going to be larger. Again, don't worry about these posts. We're going to actually change 3 of these 4 posts, so we don't need to worry about these right now. But here you'll see, we're going to bring this forward. By bringing this arch forward, that's really going to widen that bridge. And if you did put in your post, don't worry. Like I said, we're going to cover how we take care of all of this, and you're going to see here in a moment. We will mix up the gray that's for our bridge, and we'll end up actually covering up the 2 original sketch lines that we did as we started to place this. And if you've watched ahead, you've saved yourself a bunch of time because you don't have to cover up your lines. But if you didn't, if you did just like I did, don't worry, because we're going to take a gray, one of the darker grays, kind of like we used for our darkest color in our background. We're going to mix that up, and we're just going to fill in what will be the base layer of our bridge. So on top of this bridge, it's going to be snowing. So we'll end up adding snow on top of this. This is just to cover up everything that's underneath and give us a good base to work on. So I'm using my flat brush again. And I'm thinking as I do this, I'm going to want to pull some of those grays into the snow. So you're going to see this is a slightly lighter gray, which not a problem. Just blend it through. We're going to have various colors on this bridge. So just if you get something that's a little lighter, just blend it through. But here I'm going to grab some water, and I'm just going to work that paint that is at the edge of the bridge, and I'm going to pull it out through the snow, kind of glaze over the snow with some of that color, and take my blending brush and just blend it out to allow some of that snow to show through. Because we want this to look like it's a pathway that leads in the park, a pathway that leads up and over the bridge. So we're going to want that to be slightly different. And you'll see we're just going to blend these colors through, pull that out. When I did the makeup blending brush, it removed a little bit of that paint, so I just added it back, and now we let it dry. But the background of our painting is dry now. So while our bridge is drying, we're going to move to our trees in the background. Now, the trees that are in the distance, we're going to want these to be a very light gray color. So you see here, this was like that wash color we had mixed up before. We're going to tone this right down, and we're going to want this to be fluid. So you're going to add some water because you're going to want to take that and just nice and thin. This is actually a little too light still. We're going to darken that up just slightly. So we're going to make sure that it will flow nicely on our brush, and just drag up. As you get taller, pull your paintbrush off or away from your canvas or your paper, and your trees will get thinner as your branches go out. And you're just going to take that line and keep pulling it out in each different direction, wherever you feel that your tree wants to go, whichever way your branches want to be. And you pull some of them right off the page. Let them go right off the canvas, right off the paper. Make sure that some of your branches will crisscross because that's what they do in nature, right? They come up, they cross each other. If you look at a tree outside in winter, you can see all the branches crossing over each other. So we're just going to add these trees in the distance. Now, the further back they are, the thinner they are. So as I add some that I want to be even further back, I'm not actually picking up more paint. I'm just taking my brush and making my lines thinner, barely touching my paper to get them nice and thin. And I'm just adding trees in the far distance. And you see how making them thin like that, it really pushes them back into your painting. Remember, these are our background trees. So we want them to be light. We want them to be faint. We want them to be thin. They're going to be much smaller than the trees that are in our middle ground. And our middle ground trees will be smaller than the trees that go in our foreground. That's going to add depth and draw you into the painting. So we're going to add a few of these. Now, when we go to our middle ground trees, we're going to want a shade that's a little bit darker. Still not just Mars Black. We need it to be darker than our trees in their distance, lighter than the trees that are going to be in our foreground. So you see here, I'm checking the color against what I had in the background. And I want to blend that down. Again, thinning my paint so that it will flow nicely off my liner brush. And just decide where you want your trees, and you're going to start laying them in. They're going to be slightly thicker at their bases. Again, pulling up, lifting away as you come out on the branches, which will make them thinner as they get longer. Just like they do in nature. And you're just going to add those trees in. And just decide where you want your trees to go. They don't have to be exactly where mine are. And if they go over, and you're going to want them to cover parts of the trees that are in the background behind them, because that's just going to push those trees further back and add even more depth to your painting. And sometimes the way that I decide where I'm going to have my branches go is as I pull up, you're going to get kind of wavy, bumpy lines. Your line's not always going to be perfectly straight, and that's okay because trees are not perfectly straight. They have bark, they have texture, so they can be bumpy around their edges. But as I pull up, maybe I get a slight bump. Well, I'll go back to where that bump is, and then I'll pull a branch out there, and that just kind of makes it look more natural. Okay, so now that we have our trees in our middle ground, we're going to add trees in our foreground. But before we can do that, we need to do what has to be done to our snow. So we want to add our highlights and our texture into our snow. Because otherwise, when we come back through, if our foreground trees are already there, it is just going to look like we're coming up to them. It's not going to look exact. It's not going to look natural. We want all those details that are going to be in the snow behind them to already be there. So we're just mixing up some different shades of that really light gray. So we can just like we did in our brook, we're going to layer these in, going horizontally, layer these in, pull them through our snow, and you can already see here, we're starting to add texture to our snow. We're getting highlights, we're getting shadows. We're going to go to those middle ground trees, and we're going to cover over the bases of them, because if snow falls around a tree, it's going to accumulate around the base. So having a little bit of snow on those makes it look like they were there first and the snow has fallen around them. So now I'm just kind of touching up the edge of my stream because I want my bank would be higher so I wouldn't see my stream there going back. That's the way that I wanted it. Yours is however you want your stream. So just continue coming through highlights, shadows, on your edges. Make sure you really get into that edge and pull it off, because when you remove that tape, it's going to give you that nice clean edge. But you want to make sure your paint goes all the way to it and fills in all those spaces. So just continue adding your highlights and your shadows. Now we're going to take our snow, because our snow goes over our bridge and our bridge is dry at this point. So we're just going to take and we're going to go over that. And again, you'll see here, I paint right over the post because I know I'm going to be changing these. I'm going to be repositioning them. This is already helping me start to cover those up. So if you did not do your post, you are a step ahead of the game. So we're just going to add some snow in. And again, the different textures. So we're just coming through with various colors. We're going to pull that over our bridge. And you're going to see I leave an area that stays kind of dark because I know I'm going to put a couple on this bridge. And I'm going to have shadow based off where they're standing. There'll be a shadow cast on the bridge. So I don't need to cover everything in all of this snow. If you do, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You'll just touch that when you add the couple later. That will be part 3. But for now, we're just focusing on getting the snow on the bridge, blending it out so it's blending into the snow that's on the left side of our painting and looks nice and natural. We're going to add in highlights, add in more shadows, and just keep working it until you get to the point where you are happy with the way that your bridge and your snow looks. And you'll see here, I've covered some of that, but I've still left it darker in that center because I know I'm going to have my couple standing in this area. I'm going to want shadows here. So now just continuing to go through and add some more shadow into our snow. And you can just see how it just gives that snow so much texture. When you look out on the snow in winter, it's always reflecting. It's reflecting every light around it. The way that it falls, it takes the shape of the ground below it. So there's lots of bumps and dips, and that just causes so many shadows and highlights. And you'll see here we're going to add more shadow because we want to push this painting. We want to add even more depth. And another way we can do this is add our horizon line. It's going to be darker. We're going to push that back by adding a little more shadow on our snow. So it's not quite as dark. The gray is not quite as dark as our background sky color, but it's much darker than the foreground, right? Because it's dark back there. It's snowing. This is a storm. We want to add that depth. And we're going to just slightly, we're going to blend that down and let it get a little lighter and lighter and lighter as it comes forward. And we're going to add more shadow under our bridge because our bridge will definitely be casting shadow here on both sides. It will be very dark underneath that far side because this looks so much closer to the snow. It's going to be really darken that up. And now this is going to add height again to our bridge, and it's going to lift that up off of our painting. Now I'm just pulling some of that color off the bridge into the snow around it. And so this is the rest of your part 2. We're just going to focus on touching our snow, Continue to add your highlights and your shadows, blending those through to get your snow the way that you like it. And then we'll come back in part 3 and we'll hit those foreground trees when this is all dry. So just keep going. You can do as much as I do or less. It's up to you. This is your winter scene. So just keep adding those, working with your colors, highlights, shadows, different varieties. None of this is pure titanium white. None of this is pure titanium white. We're going to save that for the very end when the snow is falling and the snow that we add when we put our lamp posts on and things like that, things that are right in the very front. That's when we're going to use some of that pure titanium white. So just continue adding these various shades of gray to work in all of your shadows and highlights. As we finish adding in our highlights and shadows, I'm going to throw a little bit more highlight at the edge back here. I'm just going to blend this out just so it doesn't look like there's a dark line going straight across the back. I want it to kind of blend through. So we're going to add a little bit more highlight in there and just keep working yours to however you like it. And when we come back for part 3, we will be finishing off our bridge. We will put in the rails and our lampposts. We're going to add our couple. We will do our trees in the foreground. And then finally, we will finish off with our falling snow, like you see here. Be sure to click that like button if you're enjoying this painting. And if you don't want to miss part 3, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon so that you'll be notified as soon as part 3 is available. If you missed part 1, I will include a link to that right here. I'd like to thank you for joining me in part 2, and I look forward to seeing you in our final part as we finish off our painting in part 3. And until then, I will see you next time, and happy painting.